Donald Lee Irwin was a 59-year-old from Camdenton, Missouri. He was a Navy man and loved to tinker with electronics and machines. On December 29, 2013, he got up early as he usually did and headed down to the local store to pick up some cigarettes. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. If missing persons cases tell us anything, it's that life can change very quickly and without warning. And not to be a cynic, but usually for the worse. I mean, we never suddenly get a new car in the driveway, or a new house out of nowhere, and that job promotion that we never thought we'd get. On the other hand, car crashes, we get into them very unexpectedly. Houses will burn down that were standing tall just hours before. And our jobs, they're more likely to get unexpectedly downsized than anything else. Reversal of fortune, at least from my perception, usually only spins in one direction. I bring this up because this is what happened to Donald Irwin. He had a very quick change in the life he and his family were living. And it all started due to a bad hip that got replaced, then got replaced again. Then he lost his job because he couldn't walk. Then he lost his leg. Then his house. Then ultimately he lost contact with the rest of his family due to his disappearance. Well, today we're going to try to stop what has happened in the Irwin family over the last 10 years. We're going to try to get that reversal of fortune to spin in the other direction. And now, a summary of the case. Donald Irwin got married to his high school sweetheart in the mid-1970s after getting out of the Navy. From there, he became a salesman and instructor for Mitsubishi, providing himself, his wife Karen, and their son Jeremy a comfortable lifestyle in Atlanta, Georgia. But in his 40s, Donald began to have some health issues. He had the same hip replaced twice. Eventually, due to poor circulation, the leg on the same side as the defective hip had to be amputated. Even so, Donald continued to have recurring pain that doctors misdiagnosed for years. In addition, and just prior to this, he was let go from Mitsubishi and got on disability because he could not perform his job anymore due to the leg and hip. This then caused the entire Irwin family to move back to Camdenton, Missouri, and into a trailer. Their lifestyle had changed quite quickly. This was the situation Donald was in when he left his trailer home early on the morning of December 29th, 2013. He was going to get cigarettes, and this was not uncommon for him to make the trip at this time. Neither he nor his vehicle, a Hyundai, were ever seen again. A string of peculiarities before Donald disappeared continue to make this case more complex than it appears on the surface. A man posing as Donald's brother telling a neighbor that Donald was suicidal before the disappearance. The GPS installed by the car finance company in the Hyundai strangely pinged in a nearby town 4 days before Donald's disappearance. Young men coming over to see Donald's wife Karen after he went to bed, and his wife calling the car finance company at the beginning of December to tell them that the car payment would not be made that month. Many of these issues remain unresolved. Donald's family does not believe he ran off. They suspect foul play. The interview for this episode is with Donald's sister, Yvonne Irwin Bowen. Unfound News. The next Tribune Review Missing Persons article will be coming out very soon, either this Sunday or next. This is, of course, another disappearance from Western Pennsylvania, and you'll be able to find it at triblive.com. This time, the case concerns Terry Slogenhop, who disappeared while going out for cigarettes, very coincidentally like our Donald Irwin case today. This happened on January 6, 1991 in Highland Park. We were able to contact Terry's mother, Charlotte, who still lives in the Pittsburgh area. I hope you will check out the story when it is published. Next, free shirts continue to go out to former guests of Unfound. Have you seen the pictures they've posted on Facebook? I hope you have. I continue to work my way down the list, so if you're a guest who I haven't contacted yet, don't worry, I'll get to you, and probably very soon. Finally, did you get the Unfound newsletter last week? I think it came out around March 15th. If you didn't, please email me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. I'll put you on the list. Yes, it does have links to the books, shirts, and other merchandise Unfound has, but it mostly has information about the program, and I go into a lot more depth than I can get into either on an episode or during the Unfound live show that I do on Facebook every Wednesday night. Please contact me if you're interested. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. In particular, please join us on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern for the Unfound Facebook Live video show, which is hosted on the Unfound podcast page, not in the private group. You can email the program, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Please check out the secret Stephen Kocher episode. The website at Trib Total Media, triblive.com/news/unfound. Unfound has Patreon and PayPal accounts. Your contributions provide for many of the items guests have received so far. I cannot thank all of Unfound's supporters enough. Unfound merchandise, Volume 1 and 2 on Amazon in both paperback and ebook form. Let's try to work on getting some great reviews for Volume 2. If you've bought it, please give it a nice review. The playing cards. Go to makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound podcast. Shirts for almost all of Unfound's cases at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com. This includes the flagship t-shirt, The First Year Cases, that has a collage of everyone from Suzanne Lyle to Jennifer Wilkerson. Please check it out. And please mention Unfound on all true crime Facebook pages and other websites and forums. Thank you. A reminder, after my summary of Donald's case, stay tuned in for my interview with Stephen Huba from the Tribune Review as we discuss his upcoming article on the disappearance of Terry Slogenhop from the Pittsburgh area in 1991.
I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Donald Irwin, Yvonne Irwin Bowen. Yvonne, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Why don't you first tell the listeners a little bit about your brother Donald? First of all, was he your older brother or younger brother?
Donnie was, actually, I'm the youngest of all of us. There were 6 of us kids.
Oh, my.
And
Okay.
Donnie was closest to me in age. He was 7 years older than me. So he was my younger, older brother, so to speak.
All right. And so you have 4 siblings that were older than than Donald.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I do. 3 brothers and a sister.
And would you say that you and Donald, being that you were close in age, were you the very closest of your siblings, or how would you portray? Was he a good older brother? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Donnie was probably, in my eyes, and I'm sure that everybody thinks something like this about their siblings at one point in time, but Donnie was just really good with all of his siblings. But for me, because there was so much distance between me and my older ones, and he was here longer physically, I was exceptionally close with Donnie. He was, the big brother that, even though I was a little kid, allowed me to be part of the fun that went on in the neighborhood. And, when he went off to the service and did all of that, I was the one he left his record collection and his stereo to. I was, he was my idol. He was my hero.
Okay. And I guess maybe, people knew not to mess around with you, being that you had this older brother, Donnie, right? Kind of looked out for you.
Exactly. That also went for all my brothers, though. I mean, I was,
Okay.
like I said, the youngest of six, being a girl, but I didn't grow up with the rest of them. They were already all gone by the time I reached the age to be able to have anything to do or wanted to do with what was going on, you know. So Donnie was just the one that was left at home here, and closest to me in age.
Yeah. And what is the age spread between you being the youngest and your oldest sibling? How many years is there between you?
Me and my oldest brother, there were 15 years.
15 years. Okay. I have some kind of a similar situation in my family, so that's interesting. So, what was Donnie into? What do you remember? Being 7 years younger, was he into like high school? And you said of course, he went to the Navy. But what were his interests?
Donnie's interests, they varied. He loved music, all music. He was a huge Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, frisbee, mechanical, airplanes. I can remember going to the parks with him and watching him out at Tacoma all the time when I was a kid. But music and airplanes and his brain. He liked to use his brain to figure out different situations and um, electronics, I should say.
So his hobby was like mechanical stuff, building stuff, seeing how things work.
Yep.
Okay. And he went into the Navy. What went into that decision? Was he a big military guy, I guess, growing up? And what did he do when he got there?
I'm not really sure what the intent was as when he went in, because again, I was a lot younger and it really didn't matter to me. He didn't graduate high school, so I think at 18 he felt the best thing for him to do to gain a career, which is really what spiked his career, was going into the Navy, into the communications and electronics department. He was on the USS Enterprise during Vietnam.
Wow.
He went when I was a child. Yeah, he went in when I was a child, and when he came home, I was right between 15 and 16 years old. So it was like we lost a lot of time together during those 4 years, but it picked up right where it left off when he came home. He came home and he got married and had a baby, and then started working for a really good company and moved away.
And was that company that he ended up working for, was that related to the work that he did in the Navy, the skills that he learned when he was in the military?
I believe so. He got into a lot of the electronic parts when he was in the Navy. So when he got out, he started, after him and his wife settled down and they decided where his paths, he started locally here in smaller companies, and I don't remember the names of them, but as his intelligence grew and his interest grew and his abilities that were seen by other employees, he went to work for Mitsubishi and moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And he would fly the East Coast to different companies selling, or I don't know if you want to call it selling, but he would teach them how to make their new parts for their new product. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, he was an expert on what Mitsubishi did, and he was passing that knowledge on to others.
Right.
And so he was doing a lot of traveling, and like you said, he got married, and he had a son. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how Donald and his wife, Karen, met, and about their son that they eventually had, Jeremy.
Donnie and Karen met during school. They went to school together. They were several years apart in age, I think like 3 years. And I knew all of Donnie's friends. Like I told you before, he never excluded me from any of the activities. So with that being said, they met when Karen was 15 and Donnie was 18. And they had their son, Jeremy, while Donnie was deployed.
Okay. And maybe we should just put this on the record. How do you know how many years Donald was in the military? Just
4 years.
4 years.
He was in 4 years, a 4-year term.
Okay. So he and his wife Karen, they were like high school sweethearts. Is that a correct portrayal? And right. And when he got out, maybe he was 22, 23 years old. Maybe she was 20, 21. That's when they got married.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And they had a son, Jeremy, like you said, when he was deployed. And How old is Jeremy now in 2018? Do you know?
Oh gosh. I wish I could be honest with you and tell you I know,
Mm,
but unfortunately my relationship with that particular nephew has not been a good relationship.
okay.
Um, we don't speak. I have no idea. I know he's in his 30s. He's probably hitting 40s, real close, maybe even in his 40s. Um,
All
I
right.
know my kids hung around with him, but he was always the older boy.
Yeah, and we're
So,
going to get into why there's some estrangement going on there eventually in this conversation. So, Donald had known his wife from high school. They were high school sweethearts. They got married shortly after. He got back out of the military, maybe sometime in the mid 70s, something like that. And but at some point, this is going to be an issue in this conversation as well. Is that at some point though he started having some health issues? Do you remember when those first started coming on? Were they? Would you say that they were genetically related, or did something else happen?
actually, yes, I know exactly when his health issues started. Um, Donnie was diagnosed and had to have his first hip replacement when he was 40 years old. And they discovered at that point that Donnie had what's called osteopenia, which is the softening of the bone, and hence a little trouble with hip replacement. They told him that by the time he was 50, he would probably have to have a second one, which in this case literally did happen. Um, this, I believe, and I was never told because again, I was a child. I think it came from when he was a child, and he had what was called like Perthes disease, which is such a common thing nowadays. It's no big deal, but back in when Donnie was born in the 50s, they didn't understand how to help the bone structure grow better. So I don't know for a fact that is where this started from, but I do know that his first hip replacement was at 40, and by the time he was 50, he had a second one on the same hip.
All right. And just to remind everybody, he was 59 years old when he disappeared. So he was living with this for almost 20 years before his disappearance.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay. And then, but then he at some point, he even had a leg amputated. I mean, that's, for somebody in their 50s, I'm going to guess that's rare. But was that associated to all this other things that you've already explained?
It is. It is. I mean, it is rare. What happened was, um, after he had the second hip replacement, and he was at that time working for Mitsubishi, and it got to the point where he was having issues traveling and having issues on the job because he would have to walk the factories and the different businesses and help different people work on their computer systems to make their parts and put the new programs in and this and that. So his bones kept deteriorating so rapidly that it caused him to have to give up that kind of work. And he moved back to the Midwest. He moved back to this area, him and his wife. By that time, my nephew, Jeremy, was already a grown man and moved out. He stayed in Georgia at that time. But Donnie and Karen moved back to Missouri and started going through the VA hospital. And in 2010, he was diagnosed with a blood disorder that was causing his blood to clot up too much. And it was causing issues with the bad leg, the leg that had been through 2 hip replacements. So with that being said, he was losing blood flow to that leg, and VA felt the only thing they could do to save him, was to cut his leg off at just above the knee. So they did, and that was in 2010. And he ended up getting he thought he was having severe pain in that leg, and it's like when you get a tooth pulled and you still feel a tooth throb even though it's not there type of situation. So they thought it was a psychological issue, and they were giving him psychological meds to try to get his mind to accept that there is nothing wrong, there's nothing there. So he went on with that for a couple of years, until they found out that there really was an issue, that when they amputated his leg, they did not cauterize two nerves, and those nerves strawberried out into the end of his stump. So he was constantly in pain, period.
Oh my.
So they got to switch the medications. They had to take him off of the psychotics and put him on opiates because he was constantly going to be in pain. They never talked about opening that up and redoing it. I don't know why, but that was never anything that they discussed.
Yeah. So he was, like you said, he got prescribed opioids, which as we all know now, is a very dangerous drug, highly addictive, and that may play a role in his disappearance once we get into that. But how was he handling all this when you were talking to him? And I know that you were talking, up until the day he disappeared, you were talking to him every day. But back in 2010, how was he handling this? Was he going through any depression? I mean, how did he handle losing a leg?
Well, he had his good days and he had his bad days, just like I think anybody would if they lost a limb of any kind. And so, I have no doubt there was depression. This is a man that went from making, 6-digit income, big money, and living in a great house to living in a 14 by 70 mobile home and not having an income, being able to take care of his family to not being able to take care of his family financially. So I have no doubt there was depression. But there was also really good days because he was still a good Christian and knew that it could have been real worse than what it was. So he still had his good moments, lots of good moments. We shared lots of jokes and laughed, and I would go pick him up and bring him to my house. And, I never, ever would have thought ever that he would ever have possibly done anything to create anything to happen to him. His wife was everything to him. So when he'd get down, we would talk about it. And when he was up, we would talk about it. Either way, again, I know that if I'd lost a limb, I don't think you cannot have some sort of depression when that happens.
Sure. You mentioned his wife, and this is going to take us maybe much closer to the time that he disappeared, but as you've portrayed, he's very devoted to his wife, but you and she and maybe her mother and maybe some of the rest of your family didn't all get along. How would you portray Donald and Karen's marriage, at least from your perception, over those last few years before he disappeared?
Well, they were married 40 years, and the first however many years, it wasn't really, I don't believe, until Donnie could not function 100%. I think their marriage was great. I used to idolize her. I loved her. I thought she was a terrific woman. But when the tables were turned and it was time for somebody to take care of him, there was no help. And, mom-in-law, Karen's mother-in-law, did not like my brother and made no bones about it.
Her actual mother, you should say.
Her actual mother did not like my brother.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I got a little discouraged. No, I got a lot discouraged when Donnie was down and could not function for himself, by himself. Little task, washing hair, getting in and out of bathtub, whatever the case was, that there was nobody there to take care of him because she wouldn't do it. She just wouldn't do it. And my relationship with her went from being a great relationship to one of, I couldn't stand her.
Yeah.
I couldn't tolerate, I have forgiven her. I have to do that. But I do know that maybe if my brother had gotten better care or been taken better care of, he wouldn't have got so down at points in his life. Does that make sense?
Sure it does. Sure, it absolutely does. And I'm going to say that what you're portraying is a relationship and a lifestyle that they had that seemed to have changed fairly quickly. And I
Yes.
think a lot of people probably would react poorly to that. I mean, how poorly maybe depends on the individual, but nobody's going to be happy about that. Nobody is. So, and then on top of that, she probably wasn't prepared maybe to take care of her husband who lost a leg, and then on top of that lost his job, and they're living one place and then they move somewhere else. I mean, that's a lot of things going on, a lot of stress.
Well, he lost his job with Mitsubishi before he lost his leg. They could not, in I guess insurance reasons, he was a risk, and because of his health being risky is why they had to let him go, and that's when they moved back here and lived in Bates City in a mobile home that Donnie's mother-in-law and father-in-law, stepfather-in-law bought for them, so that he wouldn't have to worry about trying to make amends or make a living, because she wouldn't go out and get a job either. So their home was basically paid for.
Okay. And how far was this from where you lived at the time?
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we move up. So those are all the things. A lot of stresses going on in Donald and Karen's life at the time. Am I taking for granted that Jeremy maybe was out living on his own by this time?
He was still living. Yeah. When they moved back here, he stayed in Georgia.
All right.
Yes. He never, once all this once all this transpired and things started moving the way it did, Jeremy had a life in Georgia, and he stayed there. He was an adult, and so he stayed there and continued his life like kids are supposed to do.
Okay. So we move up to maybe the months and weeks before Donald's disappearance, and like you were talking to him. You told me that you would talk to him at like 6 a.m. every morning. Is that right?
Every day before, any time between 5:30 and 6, I could always count on my phone ringing, because Donnie was an early bird. He went to bed early and he rose early. So he would get up and get him a pot of coffee going, and then he'd call his baby sister. And it would really be the same words every morning. Hey, did I wake you this morning? And it'd be like, you did, without a doubt. But that was his time and my time, was the early morning, and we would share, and he would talk to me about whatever was bothering him, or what kind of day he had, or how great life was, or he was going fishing, or, whatever the case was. That was our time to talk. And it might be a 15-minute conversation. It might be a 2-hour conversation, really depending on where he was, and what he wanted to talk about.
And he would go get his cigarettes in the morning if he needed them at that time as well?
Yeah. I mean, Donnie didn't let this disability physically get him down. I mean, he learned how to use his crutches as legs. And so, he could move along with the best of us on a pair of crutches and keep up without any problem. So, he didn't let that become a disability. He kept a pair of crutches in the car, and he kept a pair of crutches in the house. And he had a ramp, and he would use the ramp to take himself in and out on a wheelchair. He'd park the wheelchair next to where he would get in the car. He'd take a couple jumps over, get in his car. There was his crutches. He knew how to maneuver around, even with one leg.
So in those weeks leading up to his disappearance, maybe being that this happened on December 29th, 2013, let's go maybe back a month, maybe around Thanksgiving time, 2013. What was one of the main concerns you would say in his life at the time? And maybe we should just ask you, were some people coming over to his house that he was suspicious of?
Yes. And I remember the conversation that Donnie had with me, and I already had my suspicions as it was before they ever moved away, because they moved that mobile home from Bates City down to the Ozarks, across from where Donnie's mother-in-law lived. And that was kind of distraught for me, because I knew at that point I couldn't just get in my car and run over and see if he needed anything, because he was going to be 2.5 hours, 3 hours away. So the phone calls and some of the conversations with my brother would be about his insecurity of his wife. and the fact that he would go to bed at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and he would be up at 5. And he found out that there were some guys coming to his house after he went to bed. And he told me one time, he said, it really bothers me. And I said, well, maybe you should confront them, And he's like, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens. Well, another conversation transpired between us that one night he did stay up, and he answered the door. And the two gentlemen who lived directly across the street seemed to be very shocked that he had answered the door, and he allowed them to come on in his house, but he asked them to leave when they chose to use God's name in vain, and he asked them to please leave his house. I don't know what happened after that. I'm assuming that they left without any incident, but he was very concerned about it.
Did any of these times, once again, did you talk to any of this come to any violence, any arguments that he ever told you about?
Between him and his wife, yes, they got into arguments all the time. My sister-in-law liked to drink a lot, and she would even call me and cuss and yell at me for no reason. And I would have to tell my brother, hey, you need to get Karen in check. He didn't even know she was making the phone calls. But yes, there were several. I don't know how many. I don't know if it was every day. I don't know if it was every week. I'm not sure what every conversation or argument was about. But yes, there was a distraught between them. She was not happy. She was living on, Social Security of her husband and wasn't living in the lifestyle that she was accustomed to. And, as far as being a 100% of a man, that wasn't there either, which used to really bother my brother, that he was not able to be, quote unquote, the man that he should be when it came to his wife. And I think that's why he was so suspicious and worried that there was something else going on behind the scenes that he was not aware of.
Yeah. I guess what I was asking before is, did he and these guys that were coming over, did he ever tell you about them having any argument? Did they ever make any threat? Not anything like that?
No, not at all.
Okay.
That's why I said I don't even know if they ever went back over after that. We never discussed that situation again. It was never brought back up, or nothing was ever said like, I got in a disagreement with the guys across the street. Donnie was not an argumentative person, so I find it hard for me to believe that he would have engaged in any kind of argument with anybody, other than being belligerent.
Right. And maybe we need to be clear. Of course, Donnie was 59 when he disappeared. I'm going to guess his wife was around the same age. How old were these two guys that were coming over to the house?
They were in their 20s. Okay. They were in their 20s.
Okay. So
and Karen was 3 years younger than Donnie. So.
Okay, so she'd been like 56, but these guys could have been maybe 30 years, possibly 30 years younger than Donald or his wife. They're coming over.
Right.
Okay, and we don't know what's going on. Okay. So they maybe having some money issues. His wife, who knows what's going on there? You mentioned she had some of a drinking problem. Their marriage had deteriorated over the last few years because of losing the job, and they moved a couple times. That takes us up to that day, December 29th, 2013. Now, maybe we want to talk about the day before. You did talk to him the day before. How was he sounding on December 28th, technically?
He was great. I talked to him, our normal conversation, which was small in the morning. And I don't remember that one explicitly because the last one I remember is the one that threw me over the edge. But that night, Donnie called me, and his son had been down there at Christmas, and they lived in a mobile home. So the phone service that they had with their cell phones that my nephew purchased for him, they weren't getting great reception. So for Christmas, he got him new phone. And I say phones. I should redo that. It's one phone.
One phone.
He only had one phone.
Okay.
And he called me. My husband and I were out watching the fights, and I got a phone call, which, really is odd for me to get a call from my brother at 8:30 at night. But, hey, I was glad to take the call, no problem. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was checking to make sure that this new phone got good service. And I said, well, I can hear you perfect. I tried to call you earlier today. I don't know if you just didn't hear the phone or if it wasn't working at the time, but it's working great now. And that's the last thing I ever heard. There was never another word said. The phone went dead, and I didn't pick it back up. I didn't think anything about it. I figured, well, he's probably, really not at a place where he can use it. Maybe he needs to step outside. So, I gave a few minutes and still no call back, but I didn't pick up and call him back either. I continued just to watch the fight, and I regret that to this day.
So just to be clear, when you had that conversation the night before on December 28th, it wasn't like you two said, "Hey, see you, goodbye." The phone call was kind of cut off.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, you didn't call him back once again. He's out there. It could easily be a couple different reasons that the phone call got cut off, but he didn't call you the next morning like he usually did. Did that maybe bother you? Anything suspicious?
It tripped a trigger. Yeah.
Okay.
It bothered me that he, but again, I still didn't put two and two together. I just went on about my day, and I didn't even think about the fact that he hadn't called at all. And I had gotten dressed, got up, got out, and was going to the store on the 29th.
What is the story for that day, as far as we know, the I guess you'd call it the official story? And when did you know, we can wrap this all up into one thing, that something was wrong, that that he had disappeared? How did you find out about all that? How did all of that transpire?
I had got up that morning, and like I said, I didn't even realize that Donnie hadn't called. I just went on about my business. I had to get out to the grocery store. It was, time for me to do that. And I went to the store. And as I was walking back in my front door, I had bags of groceries in my hand. And my husband looked at me and said, "Karen's on the phone. Donnie's missing." And all I could do was drop the bag and take the phone away from him and ask my sister-in-law what she did. Why was he missing? And she told me that they had an argument the night before, but she thought everything was fine. And she remembers him waking her up at what she thinks was about 6 a.m. to ask her for the gift card so he could go get cigarettes. And this call that I received was a little after noon, and she was wanting to let me know that he wasn't home and she couldn't find him. And she had went to the police, and of course they won't do anything for 24 hours.
Yeah, right.
And she had told him that they had gotten an argument, but she felt that it had been over with. She said that she seemed everything was fine. So it took 24 hours before a police report was actually made on a man that was on life-altering medications.
So she's saying that somehow he got up, he needed this gift card to get cigarettes, and there's like coupons, I guess you can get, maybe for this particular convenience store, a particular brand of cigarettes. He wanted that. He would go down there, and she's saying that he jumped in the car, drove down there, never came back. And then
right. And the funny thing with what you just said is that according to the places, that there were two places that he would go to, neither one of them, he never arrived. The card has never been used.
Never used. All right. So he said he was going to go down there, never showed up there. She calls you maybe 6 hours later, like you said, sometime after 12 o'clock noon, and, calls you to say that he never come back. Do you know if she did anything? I think they only had one car. Did she call anybody? I know she called the police. Did she do anything else to your knowledge?
Yes, she did. They did only have one car, but
okay.
And remember, it's her mother lived across the street. So she apparently, from what she says, now this is just what she says because I don't know it to be a
Right.
fact.
Sure.
She said that she went looking, and I'm assuming by that she had to have used her mother-in-law's car or somebody else drove her. I don't know, the neighbors. That she went to the two places that he would have gotten cigarettes, and they said they had not seen him. And that's the only thing I know that she did in that first 6 to 8 hours
Right.
until my nephew arrived at her home.
Okay, so your nephew wasn't in Atlanta when this happened. Like you said, he was there for Christmas, but he was somewhere else, and he comes over that day, and maybe they try to look for him. What did you do? Did you think about driving over there for yourself, or what did you do?
I stayed here for that day, and I gathered up my daughter, my youngest daughter, and I, and my husband. I didn't know how long we were going to be gone, so I couldn't just throw myself in the car and head 3 hours, 2.5 hours away. So we got everything lined up. I got up early the next morning on the 30th, and we drove down and we started looking on foot. And I went to her house, and my nephew was there. He had come down the night before, and the night that Donnie went missing, his son showed up the night he went missing. And first thing when I walked in the door was I met with my sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And she offered me medication to try to get through this. And of course, my first action was, "Are you crazy? You know, I need to keep my wits about me. You should be keeping your wits about you as well. You know, Donnie's missing." So
she was offering you some sort of anti-anxiety pill of some type?
yes, yes.
So you're there, and the rest of the day, maybe try to look around, everything. At that point, did you happen to recognize, once again, this is before the police got involved because it still hadn't been 24 hours yet.
Right.
Did you notice anything that maybe Donnie hadn't taken, or he had taken, anything he left at home, anything he took with him?
He didn't take anything with him other than the card. He supposedly just, which makes no sense, he wore glasses, not just for reading. He wore glasses. He left his glasses. He left a wallet with his identification. His meds, if he was going to run away, whatever, he didn't take anything but that supposed gift card. That's it. Nothing else. He left everything behind.
And the car was gone too, of course. The car.
And the car. Well, other than the car, yeah, he took
Yeah.
the keys, which meant there were no keys to the house. You know, he had everything on that key ring.
Okay.
And that was it. He didn't, which makes no sense to me.
What about the phone that he used to call you the night before? Was it there?
Yeah, he left it behind. That's how she called me, was to let me know was on that phone, because that's what they had. That was it, one phone.
So, I mean, you had to think that was a little strange. But what happened when did the police finally get involved? And then, of course, they're a whole story within themselves. But let's just keep it to, what did they do when you finally called them? Did they come out and take a report? What did they do? And
They did finally come out and take a report, and they register it with the Missouri State Highway Patrol that he had actually been missing 24 hours now. I tried to get him with the police. I had made lots of efforts to try to make them understand that this wasn't a man that just got in his car and said, "I'm going to go away." I'm just, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to go live somewhere else. That's the way the police look at a man when he goes missing, that he chose to go missing. I tried to make him understand that this is a man that needed his meds. This is a man that was in love with his wife. This is a man that loved his family. He's 59. Can't you put him on a silver alert? No, he's not old enough. So they wouldn't do that. All they did was put him on, and I can't remember the exact name for it, but a welfare check is what it was called. If they seen that car and that license plate, then they were authorized to stop him, even if he wasn't doing anything wrong, and make sure that he was okay. But he had the free will to be able, if he didn't want to go home, he didn't have to. So that was the only thing at that time, after that first 24 hours, that they initially done. They wouldn't do anything more than that. They wouldn't put out any kind of alert like an endangered person, knowing that he had blood thinners and COPD medicine and antidepressants that he was supposed to take on a regular basis. It didn't seem to matter. They wouldn't do that. They just put him on this welfare check. That's it.
Not to mention that he only has one leg, and
right,
he might be a little dependent, not totally dependent on somebody else, but at least a little dependent on others, maybe.
Right.
And you had told me that he had two sets of crutches, one in the house and one that he kept in his car. Is that what you found when you got there, that there were crutches in the house, but the ones in the car were missing?
Right. When I got there, Donnie's wheelchair was still parked right where he would have parked it to get in and out of his car. And it was snowy, so, I mean, you could tell it had been sitting there. And the crutches that he used in the house were still in the house. But again, the car was gone. And
so
never to be seen again.
All right, so Karen had been looking for him, had called you at noon that day, December 29th, and said that he was missing, but she left that wheelchair outside in the snow.
Yeah. Yes, left it sitting outside in the snow. Now, I don't know if that was they did move it one time, and that was when I first went. Like 7 days later, we did a search, and I did realize that she had moved it into the front of the trailer, like where the tongue sticks out, versus where he would park and get out of it if he chose to come home. Because otherwise he wouldn't be able to get in the house, because the wheelchair would have been way too far away from him just to do a couple of hops and jumps and get in his wheelchair. So she did move it at one point in time, but she didn't move it inside to protect it. She just let it sit out in the weather, which kind of is weird to me.
Okay, well, maybe she was just so distraught it just didn't occur to her. Maybe she thought, hey, maybe we might be inside if he does drive home, and he doesn't have his phone to call us to tell us to bring them. Maybe she was just thinking, well, I'll just leave it there if he does come back, just in case. We don't know. A lot of people, in these circumstances, if she was distraught, you're distraught. You're not thinking totally
clearly
logical.
Right.
You had mentioned, so it took about a week before you were able to organize any sort of search. Did you do this on your own or with anybody's help?
We actually found out, I mean, you spend a lot of time on the phone when somebody goes missing, because you really don't know where you're supposed to go, what avenue you're supposed to take, who's available to help you and who isn't. We found out that the Civil Air Patrol will put planes in the air, but it has to be at the call of the county that the person is missing out of. They do it for free as long as law enforcement makes that initial call. It took us a week to get them to make that call. If I would have made that call and they would have gone out that same day, it would have cost me the money. And unfortunately, I don't have that kind of money. Yeah. And so I had to depend on the law enforcement to follow through with what they knew they could do. But it took them 7 days to even get the phone call made. It's not like the weather was bad. It was winter. It was cold. There were days of snow, but there were also days in that 7 days that it was perfectly clear. But it took them 7 days to get Civil Air together. We organized a search from a VFW post on 5 Highway outside of Camdenton. And there were helicopters and soldiers, people on the ground. And if you know anything about the Ozarks, you really can't cover a lot of ground on foot.
No.
Because it's nothing but mountains and hills and huge valleys and lots of water. So we spent that day searching and door knocking and handing out flyers and whatever we had to do to keep people aware that this man was missing from their community.
How did you determine, of course, we know with an airplane, if the airplane's up there, it can cover many square miles very quickly, but for people on foot, how did you even determine where they could even look? If he's in his car, he could have gone anywhere. Was there any sort of theory behind where you even began to look?
We what we did was we started at his location, and we knew that the car only had between a quarter and an eighth of tank of gas, so his distance was limited on where he could go, and he only had $12 on a gift card. So we knew that there wasn't a lot of area that he would be able to go. So we started, we coordinated at the VFW, but we all kind of had maps, and we knew different directions, and there's all kinds of roads, and there was construction going on, and supposedly Water Patrol checked all the areas where cars could just drive off into the lake. It was it really was a good search. I just felt it was a little late instead of waiting 7 days. So everybody knew an area they were going to go walk. We found out from his wife, if he was to go to this gas station, what roads would he take? And, if he was going to cut across the country to go over to his favorite place, which was Ahatonka, what route could he take? What routes? And that's how it was more of a driving than an on foot search. Does that make sense?
Sure. And plus you're looking for a car. It's not like somebody believed he walked off into the woods or something, where his car's sitting there. You're looking for a car too, which really should be easier than finding a person, really.
Right. And you look at every, he drove a silver Hyundai. So you're looking at every silver Hyundai that drives by you, or every silver car, or when you're going down the roads that you think he could have or should have or would have or already has traveled once, you look at those roads and you're looking off the edges for places where cars might have pulled off, or gone off the edge into a ravine. And I was down there so many times searching that I looked in every ravine that I'd already looked in 25 times, thinking maybe I missed something. And that's how we started the first search. And it just, progressed from there.
Now, somebody did see something, if we're there to be believed, and these are these neighbors who were coming over that Donnie had said to you he was a little worried about, thought something strange was going on with his wife. Allegedly, at least one of those neighbors, his name is Brian J. Vaughn, one of these young guys in his 20s, as you explained, had allegedly seen Donnie that morning leaving. What can you tell the listeners about that?
Well, the word Brian, I never met Brian or his. He had two other roommates. One was a girl and one was a guy. So there were two guys and a girl that lived in the trailer across the street from my brother. That morning, the story that Mr. Vaughn gave the law enforcement in that area was that Donnie had communicated with him, that he had waved at him. Hi, how are you? I'm going to the store to get cigarettes. I'll be back later, and drove off. Now, remember, this is supposed to be 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's pitch black. And from where my brother's trailer sat, he was looking through some trees to be able to see the guy's porch, apparently, from where he was and where he spoke to him. That's what Brian told the police. But I also got a different story from his girlfriend, Amber, the next day, or not the next day, on that 7-day search, because I went door knocking. And she said that Donnie was not in the right frame of mind and that he was distraught. I don't know. She didn't say he spoke to him or anything. So there are two different conflicting stories as to what actually transpired that morning. Did he really see him and spoke with my brother, or did he not see him and he just seen him drive off? I don't know.
Yeah. And just an approximation, how far do you think it is from Brian's porch to where Donnie would have been getting into his car? Would you say that'd be more or less than 100 feet?
I'd say it was more than 100 feet. Looking through, and you got to consider too that because you've got a double wide road in there, and there was quite a bit of yard in Donnie's and then quite a bit of yard in his, and it put his trailer in the middle of trees. So it'd be, it would be complicated. It would be difficult to see somebody unless they were wearing neon orange or neon green that time of the morning.
Right. And then not to mention if Donnie went out to his car and just happened to see Brian, maybe he had his porch light on or something like that, to talk to somebody 100 feet away, you're going to kind of have to yell.
Yes, you would have to yell. It wouldn't be a conversation where it was a normal tone at all.
Yeah. And to your knowledge, was Brian involved in work or something where he would normally be up at that hour of the morning? You have any knowledge regarding that, or is
Have
that just
no idea. I have
okay?
no idea. I like I said, I never. Donnie had communicated to me in regards to this gentleman and his roommate, his worry, his anger, his dislike of what was going on, but I never met the guy at all. I don't even know what he looks like. I couldn't tell you if he was short or tall or heavy or thin or brown or black hair. I have no idea.
Okay. And I should say, if the listeners want to check this out for themselves, although Google Street View does not go in exactly into where Donnie lived, but Donnie lived at 70 Ward Park Road, and Brian lived at 51 Ward Park Road, both in Camdenton, Missouri. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So if
that is
somebody wants
right.
to do a Google satellite view, you can see how close they lived together. Now we're not sure what to think about that. Karen and her mother and Jeremy, what was their role in the searches that you did 7 days later and after that?
The night Donnie went missing, um, I was told by Karen and Jeremy that they went over to an area called Ha Ha Tonka, which was one of Donnie's favorite places, and searched. But they couldn't have done that because it's a state park and the parks are closed, gated. And so all they could have done is drove the road. That is all that was ever done by Karen, Jeremy, or Karen's mother to search for Donnie. They never attempted any of the searches with us, not one.
Did they ever get in their car and drive around? Did they put boots on and walk around maybe the Lake of the Ozarks, anything like that?
No. The only time they got in the car and drove around was the 29th, the evening Jeremy got there, and they drove over to Ha Ha Tonka and drove D Road. And off of D Road is how you get into the different parks of that area, and they're all gated. So all they could have done was drove the D Road. That's it. That there was no other put on clothes and come pound the pavement. She showed up at VFW Hall the day that they did the Civil Air Patrol, and spoke with a detective, and then was asked to be taken home. She did not partake in the search at all, and never did. Any of them, not one.
Okay. Did she or Jeremy, maybe you have maybe a little better relationship with him, did they offer any explanation as to why that was?
No, not a word. I haven't even talked to my nephew since his dad went missing. He wants nothing to do with me. I'm not sure why, but I have my suspicions that I won't let this go, and I think they wanted it to be let go. So,
all right, listeners will decide that for themselves. All we can do is put the facts out there, and the fact is
sure.
that after that first day, they didn't do much.
They didn't do anything. It's not even a word much. They didn't do anything.
Didn't do anything. Okay. One more thing we need to talk about with the sheriff's office, and I'm not exactly sure when this happened. Before we get into some of the peculiar part of some of these things that happened before Donnie's disappearance, is that at some point you and the Camden County Sheriff's Department started not getting along so well. Maybe you need to let the listeners know how that happened.
I think that I pushed too many buttons and I asked too many questions. And I can remember numerous conversations, but one in particular, I had gotten an actual phone call from a lieutenant that was on Donnie's case that called me straight up on my phone and told me that I was making him and his department look like they weren't doing their job, that I needed to quit trying to ask for help and get people to help me find my brother, that was their job. And then I quit getting return phone calls. I would call every other day just to see if they had found anything, or to ask a question, or to go, hey, have you checked this? Or whatever was on my mind that day that I felt they needed to know. It got to the point where they never called me back. No return phone calls. It was almost like they had caller ID and they knew it was me and they weren't going to answer the phone because they didn't want to talk to me. That went on for like, Donnie be gone 5 years this year. So for the first probably 6 months, I got communication. After that, I didn't get any communication.
And how long would you say after Donnie disappeared that they maybe started being a little confrontational with you and claiming that you were making them look bad? Do you remember when that conversation took place?
Yeah, that was like 3 months in. That was like 3 months into him being missing. I got the phone call that I needed to stop, that I was making them look like they weren't doing their job, cussing and yelling at me. My husband heard it from the passenger seat of the car, and I had the phone to my ear. That's how loud he was yelling at me. That was like in the first 3 months.
Okay. Now, the listeners should know, and you had told me this, and I went and checked this for myself. There is a blog/website that's devoted to Camden County, Missouri, portraying it as one of the most corrupt in the United States. I don't personally know if that's the case. There's a lot of corrupt cities and counties out there in the United States, but there's certainly a lot of tales out there from Camden County. But you've led me to believe that the new regime in the sheriff's office maybe is a little bit more open-minded to you and talking to you.
Yes. The new administration took over at the end of 2016. Usually what happens is when sheriff is, when they're running for office, they usually don't take over until the beginning of the following year after they run. Camden County was actually shut down by the FBI for several months and investigated. I don't know to what degree the investigation was. I do know that communications was lost. And then when the new sheriff took over office, I instantly was thrilled to death that possibly somebody would listen. And I was able to get past the lobby because before I never made it past the lobby. I could walk into that sheriff's department and ask to speak with somebody and nobody would ever talk to me. This was the first time last year, 2017, because the new sheriff took over in December. And I went in there and talked to him, I think it was like February of 2017, and made it past the lobby doors.
Okay. And would you say that, we're now doing this interview on March 19th, 2018. How would you say that your relationship is with the sheriff's office right now?
Much better. I can call them. They return my calls. They have no hesitant. In that visit I had with them, they actually gave me a copy of what they had for Donnie's file. Yeah. So I have everything that was at least typed into a computer, except for 10 pages in my possession. And I don't know why I didn't sit down and read that more intently. I think I was just thrilled at the fact that I made it past the lobby door. But there were a lot of questions that in this report, little red flags flew up everywhere for me.
Well, let's talk about those right now. How about, what do you say? Okay. Being that did come up, and what happened, what she is talking about, listeners, is that, of course, Yvonne and I have already had a couple conversations before this interview, and after one of our conversations, she went back and looked at that paperwork and started to discover things that she had forgotten. And I want you to know, Yvonne, that happens quite a bit. Where when I talk to a future guest and they go back to paperwork, and it's like, oh, I forgot about this, I forgot about that. And this is exactly the reason that this program exists, to start conversations. Let's just start here. Okay. We know that Donnie disappeared with his car. It was a Hyundai. I have a Hyundai as well. But let's start with Karen's call at the beginning of December to the company that financed, the car was being financed at the time. They had to make car payments on it. Why don't you talk about that first?
Okay. When they had an Explorer, an SUV before this that Donnie had a lift on for his mechanical wheelchair, and it broke down, and my cousins and stuff went over and tried to fix it, but it was a goner. So they went to a We Finance place and got him a car, which actually became kind of beneficial, but yet not. That car company Karen had called them at the beginning of December and told them that she wasn't going to be making the December car payment. And I don't know the reason why I was not told that. And how I know this is a set of eyes I have in the Ozarks. We're friends with the people that owned this car company. And when Donnie went missing, they offered and volunteered that information to them, that she had said that she wasn't making the December payment on that car. That car also had a low jack system on it, which was
we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a second. I want to ask you some questions just about that. How long after Donnie disappeared did they tell you about her making that call?
That was in the first initial couple of weeks, because that was when I reached out to the people in Camdenton via the internet, and other people down there got on board and helped me and did some research, because I lived up here, they lived down there. And, that's how that transpired, was I put a help. This man is missing. He's my brother.
All right. And once again, we have to remind the listeners, Donnie was talking to you almost every day up to his disappearance. Did he ever say anything about not making a payment on his car?
No.
And do you know when that payment would have been due for the car? If she wasn't going to make it, was the payment due on the December 15th or December 29th? Do you have any idea?
I wish I could give you a specific date on that, but that was his personal life. He didn't discuss that with me, so I don't know when that payment was due. I don't know if it was due at the first or at the end of the month.
Okay. So your brother never let you know that, maybe they were having some sort of money issue, or maybe might have been too proud to do that or whatever, but
right.
Not less than a month before Donnie disappears with his car, his wife calls this finance company and says, we're not going to be making our car payment. I'm sure the finance company couldn't have been too happy about that. Now we'll talk about what we would call a low jack system. Technically, it's a GPS system of some type that is installed when used car places are going to finance their own vehicles. So they sell a car and they don't pass it through a regular bank. They do the financing themselves. They put this GPS on in case somebody doesn't make their payment. They can shut the car off anywhere. What did you find out about that after the fact?
That was one of the main things that we were looking positive at, is that there was a way to track the car at least. But when contacted the car owner, the company that owned the car, there was no current ping going on, which according to the police meant one of three things. It was disconnected, it was in a low signal area, or it was submerged. So it took a while. But they did find when that car last pinged.
And when was it, and where was it?
It was, according to the records, it was December 25th of 2013 in a little town just south of Camdenton, in a town called Lebanon, Missouri.
And do you have an address? This is very interesting, folks. This is the kind of stuff that we're always looking for. Do you have an address of where this ping happened?
Yes, I do. That address, the 911 address is 165,020 County Road 5-806, Lebanon, Missouri 65536.
Okay.
It also states that that number would be in the 1800s, and the road, that particular 911 road, is called Gentry Road.
Okay. Now, if somebody wanted, I have Googled this, and it's very confusing because I could not find a County Road 5806. I think I found a County Road 5606 and a County Road 5, starting with the 406, maybe something 404. Couldn't find that specific address. Maybe you can explain why that is, or so is it Gentry Road, or?
Well, when we Googled it with Google Earth, and when we typed in 165,020 County Road 5-806 Lebanon, Missouri, and the zip code 65536, it took us smack dab into the middle of a gravel road with a house on each side of the road. If you enlarge that and you look at the whole road, there's like 20 houses on that road. That's it. And it's not marked. If you were to drive there, I'm assuming that it's not marked County Road 5806. It's marked Gentry Road.
Okay. So so we should be looking, once again, the listeners want to do that, they should be looking for something like 1800 Gentry Road of Lebanon, Missouri, something like that.
Right.
Okay. Have you ever driven down there? Have you talked to anybody who lives on that street? To your knowledge, did Donnie or anybody else know anybody that lived on that road?
I have never driven down there. Not to say that when I go down in April, I won't be. But I just got this information. I mean, I got it, but again, I don't know how I missed this flag. You know, I don't know how I missed this flag when I walked in the police station and was allowed past the lobby doors and literally talked with the sheriff and the I think he's a major. He is a major that is investigating. They reopened up Donnie's case, so I now have the address, and yes, I intend to go there. But I don't know anybody that my brother knew in Lebanon, Missouri. He never talked to me about anybody that lived in Lebanon, Missouri at all. And we talked about his friends. So,
sure.
You know, sure I know that he didn't. Right. I don't believe he knew anybody. Again, that's an assumption, but I don't believe he knew anybody in Lebanon, Missouri, and I don't believe my brother would drive all the way to Lebanon, Missouri.
And he surely didn't tell you anything about the GPS that was on his car or the financing, anything like that.
No, no.
Listeners should know that after I was told about this from Yvonne in one of our prior conversations, I did a little looking into how these things work and everything, and you can disconnect them. It is possible. It's not easy, and every car is going to be different. But the thing about it is that if you try to disconnect it, it will send out one last ping before you disconnect it. So it's not like you can disconnect it secretly without the finance company knowing. If you try to do that, they're going to know. My suspicion is that's what happened because finance companies, at least the way I understand it, just don't randomly ping cars to see where they are. I'm more inclined to believe that this thing was being disconnected 4 days before Donnie disappeared.
Absolutely. And within reading this report again and again and again and again, you're absolutely right. They didn't ping it on a regular basis because the payments were being made. The only time that they'll go in and request a ping from their unit is if somebody has not made that payment.
Yes. Now,
so when they went back in and investigated, okay, let's see when the last ping was. That last ping was on the 25th of December.
Now,
and he went missing 4 days later.
Sure. And granted, Karen did call him and say they weren't going to make a payment, but the way I understand a lot of things that happen with payments is that, they're not going to cut you off after the first payment. If you miss one rent payment or something, there are laws against kicking a resident out of their apartment if they miss one payment, maybe takes 2 or 3. Same way with a car. It takes usually a couple payments before you get anything repossessed. So the GPS thing is going to be something that's interesting until you go maybe look at it further. Do you know if the police have looked into it at all?
I've actually talked to them, and they are supposed to be looking into that and looking into a couple of other things that I've requested them to look at that they have written in their report. So, yes, that is something they're supposed to be looking at as, Okay. They told me that Lebanon sent officers out there, but they couldn't find a car. And so and since then I have said to them, did anybody knock on a door and say, have you seen this man or this car? Not just the car, because the car's gone too. You got to ask about the person too.
Sure. So we have some very peculiar things that happen regarding this car in the month before the call, and then this GPS ping down in Lebanon, and you have no knowledge that Donnie would have ever been down there. Is it possible that Karen maybe drove down there with the car?
Could be, and it could also be that Jeremy was in that car. Again, things come to light when you go back in and you start rereading. Jeremy spent Christmas with his mom and dad that year. That's how they got the new phone. So this happened on Christmas Day when they got the last ping. So it could have been Karen. It could have been Jeremy. It could have been Donnie. I don't know.
Just don't know. And it is strange that somebody would be maybe working on a car on Christmas Day. That's
right.
That's a little strange. All right, so we've covered that. Listeners will look into that. We've talked about Donnie's things, how he left his wallet, the phone, all left at his home. The wheelchair was left in the driveway. Let's move on to this. We're going to go to the brother. Stopped in, and this is something else that happened before Donnie disappeared. Why don't you explain to the listeners about this?
Well, apparently, and I'm still waiting to find out when this conversation transpired. So that's something else that'll come up. Apparently, some man pretending to be my brother's brother, which would mean he was my brother, went down and discussed with a neighbor that Donnie was depressed and was literally talking about supposedly committing suicide, to the degree of exactly what he would do, where he would do it, and that nobody would find him. I mean, gave description of the road and everything, and asked the neighbor to please watch out for Donnie. When I got the police report, well, at that time I was told this by the Camden County Sheriff's Department. I told them that can't be true, and they said, well, you don't know that. And I responded to them with, yes, I do, because neither one of my other brothers have ever been down there. I'm the only one that's ever been to Donnie's trailer. Then I get this police report, and I start reading it, and I realize that there was a man pretending to be my brother's brother by the name of William. And I want to know when this conversation took place, and I'm waiting on that phone call because they said they would go back over and talk to the neighbor that had the conversation. I want to know, was this 2 days before he went missing? Was this a month before he went missing? Was this the day he went missing?
When did you exactly find out about this conversation? Do you remember?
I just found out about this conversation when I met with the sheriffs in 2017 when they handed me this police report. We went over this together, and again, I missed a lot of things that I didn't see, and that's when they told me. So this was in like April of 2017, February, April, somewhere in there, that the police told me that this conversation took place between my brother, another brother, and the neighbor.
All right.
And I told them they were wrong.
And there's no way that one of your other brothers, once again, we've gone through it, that you have a big family, 6 kids. There's no way that either of your brothers were down there or anything like that. Do you know if this neighbor who had this encounter would be able to describe? And have you ever talked to that neighbor yourself? And would he be able to describe what this guy looked like?
Well, I have talked to him on one of the searches. We went down and he met us because we went down to actually where Donnie resided, because the mobile home, the little one-street mobile home park, sits on 31 acres. And the owner of that property had contacted me and said that she didn't feel the police had ever searched, and she wanted to search. Would I come down and search with them? And of course I said yes. And so we went down and searched that property. And upon our search being completed, that neighbor came out and talked to me and told us straight up that the only thing he told us was that the mother-in-law made no qualms about not liking my brother. And that's pretty much all that he ever said to me. He never said anything to me about a conversation between one of Donnie's brothers and him. I found that out when I read the police report.
Okay. And it may be that this neighbor didn't want to say anything because he might have thought that you already knew, because he took for granted that it was your brother too.
Right.
That's a possibility. There are, I guess, other possibilities that maybe he's just making it up. That's a possibility too. We just don't know, but it's surely something that could be looked into. Did you say that the neighbor actually identified this person by name or not? Did this person?
No, he could not. In the report, it states that he could not remember the man's name.
Okay. But you have a suspicion, if we're to believe that something, some conspiracy was afoot that December of 2013. You do have an idea who, I don't know if we want to give the person's name, but you have an idea who this might have been.
Absolutely. After rereading this report page by page, I ended up reading on January 1st of 2014, where my sister-in-law, her nephew, and another man by a completely different last name is listed as going into the lobby to speak with the sheriff's department. And this man was listed as a family member, a brother to Donald. And I can tell you right now, this man is not my brother's brother. He is not even my sister-in-law's brother. She was an only child. This is a relative of hers, but it is not her brother, nor is it my brother. I believe that this is the same man that carried on the conversation with the neighbor.
So what you're saying is you have regarding your brother's disappearance, you have two different circumstances separate of each other where somebody was posing as one of your brothers.
Yes.
One time for the neighbor and then one time at the police department.
Yes.
Wow. And we just gave out his first name, Billy, and we're just going to leave it at that because it's something that maybe should be keep kind of close to the vest, at least for the second. But it's not, last name is, of course, not Irwin. It's something else.
Nope.
Okay. So we got that going on, and maybe that's a pretty good lead as well, especially if the neighbor can remember what this guy looked like.
Yes. And when I go down in April, I intend to show him pictures.
Sure. I think that'll be a great idea. Yes, of course. Donnie disappeared, and Karen ran into some issues with some money, and she wasn't listed on papers. I just have that in my notes. What was that in regards to?
Well, that all started when she was. We found out originally that she was not listed as my brother's next of kin at the VA hospital in Kansas City. In order for me to do a lot of different things, I needed to get all of the information I could where Donnie was concerned, like there's a specific name for the paper that you get when you complete your service in the military, DD-14 or something like that. And I needed that from the veterans from the VA hospital. My sister-in-law went down to get it, and they wouldn't give it to her because she was not listed as Donnie's next of kin. I was. Then I kind of blew that off. Okay, he just put me and her, and they're just using me. But then after he had his leg amputated and he went missing, all that was done through Columbia, Missouri VA hospital. And, I don't know, 2 months after Donnie went missing, I got a phone call from Donnie's primary doctor at a Columbia, Missouri VA hospital stating that she had been there demanding that they declare him legally dead because Social Security had cut her off of his money because he's not dead, and it takes 7 years to prove that he's dead. He's just missing. So she called me to let me know that Karen was trying to have him declared dead and that they couldn't give her any information anyway because, again, my brother did not list his wife as his next of kin. He listed his sister.
And do you have any idea? I mean, were you even aware of that before that happened?
Nope. Not until he went missing did I know that he listed me and not her.
Okay. And do you have any idea when he would have filled out that paperwork? I mean, would that? I mean, being that it's a VA, is this possible? This goes the whole way back when he first entered the military, or would this been something more recently?
Oh no, it had to be more recent. I was just a child when he went into the military.
Sure.
I was just in, when he went in, I was like 10 or 11 years old. So there would have been no way he would have listed me then. This had to have been from the time he came back to Missouri, when all the health issues started and he started depleting. That's when he had to have put me. And when problems started in the home, I think that's why he put me and not her. I don't think he trusted his wife. I think he trusted his little sister. And that's why he did that. And he didn't inform her either. She had no idea. Neither one of us knew.
What was the eventual result of all of that?
Nothing. She was unable to obtain information. She was directly disconnected from his Social Security. They stopped sending the checks. The reason they stopped was because at the end of every year, when you're on Social Security disability, you have to renew for the next year. That paperwork came in the mail, but the mail was never checked after Donnie went missing because she left and she didn't give a change of address. So when she got a phone call finally from Social Security, and she went down to their office and they went to fill out the paperwork, and she told him he was missing, they cut her off. And that's when I received a phone call of, your brother told me that if anything ever happened to him, I would always have his money. And then she started wanting him declared dead.
So I guess to break this down, maybe for a lot of people who don't understand how the VA works or Social Security works, of course, for people who are listening outside the United States, what we're trying to say is Karen was trying to get some of Donald's money and she couldn't.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly it.
Okay. And she was trying to have him declared dead only 2 months after he disappeared.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said that she moved out, and we're going to get back to that in a minute, but she did move out. And who moved in shortly after Donnie disappeared? Who moved into the trailer that she and Donnie were living in?
Mr. Vaughn and his roommates.
The people across the street.
Yes, the one that said he had a conversation with Donnie and then recanted and said he didn't have a conversation. They're the ones that moved directly into the mobile home.
Okay, and were you ever able, or were the police ever able in that time span in there before, of course, Brian Vaughn moved in there, to check it out, to see if there's any signs of violence, anything weird, carpet ripped up, anything like that?
The only time the sheriff's department went into that house was in order to get my brother listed with an organization called NamUs, which is an organization that carries a DNA of anybody that's missing. I needed DNA samples of Donnie. I needed anything. He didn't have his dentures in. He played the harmonica. I needed these things in order for them to get an accurate DNA. Otherwise, they had to pull from me, his wife, and his son and figure out what Donnie's DNA was. I requested, with the help of the Kansas City Crime Lab, that Camden County Sheriff's Department go into that mobile home and find something that belonged to my brother. With that request, they had to get approval from Karen, which they did. And they had to climb in the back window because the door was locked and the house key was with Donnie. And they did gather up his dentures, his harmonica, a cigarette butt, some chewing gum, which my brother didn't chew, but that's okay. And they took some pictures of the house, but they never investigated as a crime scene. They never looked for anything like at least if they did, they didn't list it in their report.
Okay. So that was the only time, and of course, once Brian moves in there, I mean, you're not going to get any access to it, whether he had anything to do with it or not. He's just not going to let probably people come in. And do you have any idea if Brian Vaughn and anybody else still lives in that trailer out there?
No, I don't. I got to be honest with that. I mean, I spent a lot of time um, searching for my brother. And you and I have talked about this. There was a point that I had to slow myself down and remember that I had a life too.
Yeah.
And so my ability to get down there goes to once a year when I go down in April and I hand out flyers and go on little jaunts around the areas that he might have been, and I've never gone back there and knocked on that door. I went back one time and one time only, and was greeted with, "We run back in the house." So nobody would talk to me.
So you've had no conversation, no communication with Brian, Amber, or this other guy that was living in the trailer across the street, who I guess moved into Donnie and Karen's trailer ever since right around when Donnie disappeared.
Right.
Now, I'm going to bring up something here, and once again, I always remind the listeners when something like this happens, we don't necessarily care. We're not here to judge people, okay? We don't care about any sort of things going on behind the scenes that a victim was involved in. As the listeners know, on Unfound, we've actually covered the disappearance of 2 drug dealers, okay? I just don't care. If a family wants to find out what happened to their loved one, that's why I'm here. I'm not here to make judgments. But you had told me in our conversation, and you know where we're going here, that Donnie might have had a drug dealer that he was getting opiates off the books, couldn't get them from the VA. Explain how you think that might have happened and how you eventually learned about this.
Well, I didn't know Donnie was illegally getting opiates until after he went missing, and conversations between me and other brothers came to light, and I was informed that he was getting them illegally. The reason that I was told he was getting them illegally, and the reason that I already know, is I also had conversations with Donnie about Karen eating his pain meds. In other words, she would start drinking and popping his pills. When you get medication through VA, it's on a time frame, and they would mail Donnie his prescriptions according to how he was supposed to take them. So it was very well monitored through VA. And if you have somebody that is helping you consume those, then you run out. And therefore, hence, we found another way to get them. And that way, he always had pain meds. I found this out, like I said, after he went missing, and I found out who the person was that he possibly was getting him from.
So,
and I did tell the police about him.
Okay, good. So are we under the understanding then maybe a couple of your brothers knew that Donnie was getting things off the books, and you didn't find out afterwards, or?
Right. Okay. They were protecting me, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Or, they said, straight up, you do realize Donnie was getting pain meds somewhere else. And I'm like, no, I didn't know that.
All right. What was this drug dealer's name? Do you know it?
His name was Pat. I do not know his last name.
All right. Drug dealer Pat. Where is he now?
He's deceased. At least that's what we've been told.
Okay. So do you have any ideas? Once again, you found this out after Donnie disappeared. Were your brothers or anybody else able to tell you how he might have even hooked up with this drug dealer in the first place? Me personally, I wouldn't even know where to start if he wanted to do something like that. Any idea how this got started? How he even got introduced to him?
I'm pretty, and unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I do believe that part of the scenario revolves around another family member of mine, and I do not wish to release her name.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure through family, she resides in the same area, and I think she's the one that turned my brother on to this person.
You have any idea how much money Donnie was happening to give out to this guy? And has that ever come up? It couldn't have been cheap?
No, it couldn't have been cheap. And no, I don't. Again, I think my brother picked and chose what he discussed with me. Yeah. And I don't think that, Donnie wouldn't, Donnie just never told me financially that they were devastated. They had a new car. I knew what kind of money he made on, I mean, he made not bad money on disability. And I knew they had no rent payment. So I was never really concerned with the financial issue. So I wasn't, without knowing that he was doing this, I was unaware. I don't know where he got the money. I don't know if that's why they weren't making the December car payment. I don't know.
Yeah.
When he lived here in Kansas City, outside of the city limits, I was much more aware of things that went on. When they chose to uproot and move their home across the street from Karen's mother, I no longer was privy to that. I was no longer able to be a part of his life the way we were.
So you've actually entertained the idea that maybe Donnie disappeared having to do with this drug situation.
Yeah, I do. And in the beginning, in that 7-day period, when we did the first search with Civil Air Patrol, I did tell law enforcement my worries and my concerns. From the beginning of the alphabet to the end of the alphabet, and I was told by and I don't remember his name, he was actually with the Civil Air Patrol, that if I continued to tell them these things, that this investigation was going to go a different direction, and then they quit talking to me about it. So yes, they knew everything. They knew every one of my worries and my concerns, from the men coming in the house to the drugs. They knew, they were aware, and did nothing.
But the new sheriff knows all this stuff too, though, and we're hoping he looks into it.
Yes, he does, and I hope he does.
Okay, but unfortunately, Pat is dead. Maybe they can find out who some of maybe Pat's business partners, or can track down maybe his last name. We can find out a little bit more about him, but unfortunately, he's dead. So that might be, not to use the pun, but that's a little bit of a dead end.
Yes.
But it's possible. I have to tell. I've told the listeners about 40% of the disappearances that we cover on Unfound have drugs eventually enter into the picture one way or the other. About 40%. So it's quite, it seems it comes up a lot. Let's talk about Karen and Jeremy a little bit more to finish off this conversation. There was something that you discovered in your paperwork since we first talked on the phone regarding that night before. What can you tell the listeners about that?
Well, apparently, I have read in this that the last time that so-called gift card was used, it was used by Karen the night before, the night of the 28th at 9:30 at night. And my guesses would be that she, and I say guesses because I don't know yet, would be that she went and got cigarettes. With that being said, why would Donnie get up the next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and go get cigarettes? And that would also be after the conversation that Donnie and I had, because we talked around 8:30. She went out and used that card sometime around, and it says 9:30, 21:30 is what the time says. So I have also, since I reread this, asked the Sheriff's Department to please track that. I want to know what she purchased. And they said, well, you realize it's been almost 5 years. And I'm like, well, the credit card company will still have that on their files. There's, you've got a specific time and a date. All you have to do is, they've got the card number, apparently. I don't know how they got that, but they do, because they tracked the last sale being her. Somebody's got the information, or they wouldn't know that it was used.
And this was news to you. I mean, this was something that was in your paperwork that you were given, but it just turned up recently when you started to go back through it again. Had Karen ever said to you that she had gone out, or to anybody that she had gone out the night before?
No.
For cigarettes, nothing.
No. All I was told was that her and Donnie when I got that phone call on the 29th at just a little after 12, and I dropped my grocery bags, the first things out of my mouth was, were you drunk and what did you say? That was, and never did she say, well, I got mad and I left and went out. She never said that she'd left the home because of the argument. Nothing like that. I was on the belief that they had their argument, they had their disagreement, and Donnie went to bed and all was fine.
And where she went, would this have been one of the same stores that Donnie allegedly would have been going to the next morning?
I'm pretty sure. She didn't like to drive either, so I'm pretty sure it would be the same location. Okay. There's not much out there in the boondocks.
All right. Now, you had mentioned already, and we wanted to get into this, but you mentioned that not long after Donnie disappeared, that she and her mother just fled Camdenton. How long after that did that happen? Did they offer any explanation? Anything?
Well, the first time Karen left was exactly 2 weeks after Donnie went missing. She took some clothes and came to Lee Summit, Missouri to live with her son, who had relocated there from Georgia. She just, the reasoning was she couldn't handle it. Then she never went back. Within 2 months, she had completely moved all of her belongings out of the house and threw my brother's belongings in the trash. She moved in with her son, and we went down on a search. I had said earlier that the owner of the property had us come down. And that's when I found out that at the same time, her mom, Donnie's mother-in-law, not only moved, she moved lock, stock, and barrel and didn't give no forwarding address or nothing. She moved her mobile home and all just vanished. And I never did find out where she moved to. But yeah, within 2 months, they were both gone. And this is a woman that was married to a man for 40 years and didn't stay in case that he come home. It was a little flabbergasting that she would do that and that she would throw all my brother's stuff in the trash. And I know she threw it in the trash because it was a neighbor on the block down and over that had my brother's Hoveround, his little scooter, and asked me if I wanted it, that he had taken it out of the dumpster. And I told him, no, if you need it, use it. I was just flabbergasted by that.
Are you under the impression, being that you had said that the mother-in-law was the one who got the trailer for Donnie and Karen, did the mother-in-law sell that to Brian J. Vaughn, or did he rent it out? Do you have any idea what happened?
I don't know. I don't know if she's the one that sold. I don't know if it's sold. I was told that it was rented out before Karen quit speaking to me when I refused to stop searching or help her declare my brother dead. She did communicate with me, and she told me that she was going to rent it out. And again, I was flabbergasted and flustered with the fact that she was even thinking about moving out of the area. What if he come home? What if he really was lost? This is a man you spent 40 years with. Why would you just pack your stuff up and move? He won't know where you're at. That might have been a grieving sister too. That might have been where my mind was. Maybe she really couldn't handle it. But I don't know if the trailer was rented by her, or if it was rented or sold by her mom. I couldn't tell you that one.
Okay. Where is Karen, Donald's wife, now?
She is deceased. She came down with, she got real sick, and they took her to the hospital, and apparently her body was ate up with cancer, and they didn't know. And they did surgery on one tumor in her brain and was waiting for her to get over pneumonia before they could operate on the second one, and she passed away.
And when was that?
2 years after Donnie went missing, so
2015, 2016. So it's been a couple of years.
Yeah.
And and we have to remember this disappearance just happened at the end of 2013. So she's died since then. This drug dealer has died since then. And what about Karen's mother?
She just passed away last year. I found this out because my children are still friends on Facebook with Donnie's son, Jeremy. And they had read that his grandmother had passed away. I don't know of what or how or why. I don't even know where she was living at when this happened, but she has since is deceased as well.
And through all that time, from December 28th, 2013 until she died or the mother-in-law died, did either of them ever offer up any theory as to what happened to Donnie? Anything?
Well, no. In the police report I did read where the mother-in-law did state that Donnie had his up and down moments, and but she didn't think he would ever commit suicide. She told him that straight up, and that this was really unlike him to not just do what he said, be there and come back. But nobody has ever offered. Karen, my ex-sister-in-law, I will say one time she tried to get me to believe that he had killed himself with blood thinners, and she felt that he might have taken a bunch of blood thinners and gone somewhere and bled out, which I tried to explain to her was really stupid thought. Why would you want to kill yourself in that kind of a slow manner? Yeah. But that's the only time anything out of either one of them. And where the nephew is concerned, he just doesn't have anything to do with me, so I don't know what his theory is.
Never said anything, even when you were up there and saw him. Never, like you said, I guess your friend, your kids are friends, still friends with him on Facebook, whether they talk or not. Never even said anything on there regarding any of this.
No, I've literally asked the sheriff's department straight up. This new one, the new regime, the new sheriff, I asked him straight up because I was curious. I mean, it's been almost 5 years. Am I the only one calling you about my brother? I said, has his son ever once reached out to you? And they told me no. They have never talked to Jeremy since the initial conversation with them in regards to his dad being missing. That's it. 5 years, not a word.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So we have a few people who might know some things deceased, if we're inclined to go to that direction. We have your nephew who you knew since he was born, that
yes,
you have no communication with whatsoever, and the car is still missing, Donnie's still missing, and we don't know who this fake brother was. We have a lot of things that are still hanging out there regarding this case. What's this been like the last, it's been over 4 years now. What's it been like for you? I mean, how do your other siblings feel about all this?
Well, for me, my other siblings, let's go this way. My other siblings, I love them to death, and they all know it, and we try to communicate as often as we can, but we all have different lives that go in different directions. I think for them, it's easier to accept if they don't question, if they don't help, if they don't look. So it's pretty much me that goes out and pounds the pavement at least once a year, or hounds Facebook with his flyer as often as I can, or go to different events where it involves other missing family members for other people. For me, this last year, or these last 4 years, there's an emptiness. We always know when our parents, like my mom and dad, they passed away, but I knew they were going to pass away. They were old and they were dying, and you accept that, and you know that they're going to a better place. But here I have a brother that was my best friend from the very, very beginning of our relationship as brothers and sister. To not be able to hear his voice or know where he's at. I mean, my heart knows that he's probably dead. And but then there's that part of you that still clings to the hope that maybe he just has forgotten something, or some miracle God will bring him back. it's the hardest thing I've ever dealt with in my life. The emotions that you go through. There's hate, there's fear, there's anger, there's so many different things that compile themselves inside you, and it can eat you up really fast. And that's why I said I had to realize that I have to still live. And there isn't a day goes by that I don't think of my brother or shed a tear. I live in the house that we grew up in, literally grew up in. So it's really hard sometimes because I'll probably stay here the rest of my life because I know this is the only place left for him to go. If he's alive and he finds his way home. It's hard.
Yeah.
And until you go through it, you don't understand it. It's not the same as somebody dying, your thoughts of where they are and what they're doing and, how did he die? Did he just lay somewhere and die? Did he drown? I've had visions of his hair floating in the water. I've had visions of him being shot in the head. There are no answers. So all you can do is ponder all these different thoughts that go through your brain. That's how it's been. If it wasn't for my husband and a granddaughter and my children and so many Facebook friends on his page who are complete strangers I've never met, but they hold me up a lot,
Yeah. Speaking of which, where can the Unfound listeners find you on social media and other places? If they'd like to share, follow you and what you're doing,
Sure.
and, so they know, I know you said you're going to be doing something here in April, so they can keep posted on your continuing investigation into this.
Okay. Donnie has 2 pages. One is called Find Donnie Irwin. Real simple. It's a Facebook page. All you got to do is search that. It'll take you right to it. The other one is called Justice for Donald Lee Irwin, Missing Veteran. Again, just search that in your Facebook and you'll find it. Those are his 2 pages.
Okay. And you had mentioned NamUs before, which I know that, many people are familiar with, but I don't think that Donnie is currently listed on charlieproject.org, which
Never
is another
heard of
huge.
that one.
Okay, that's a huge. Well, my friend Megan Good, everybody knows I'm friends with Megan Good, who runs that site. It has like about 9,800 missing persons cases on it, people who are still missing. So she listens to this program. I'm going to personally, of course, tell her that to get Donnie's information so she can put it on her site as well. It's a very, very popular site, just like NamUs is. So,
awesome.
we're going to try to make that happen for you for sure. For sure. charlieproject.org. Yes, you should absolutely check that website out. Megan Good does a lot. She's been doing it for like 10 years now, at least, doing good work for missing persons families on her site. Any last words before we conclude this interview, Yvonne?
No, other than just thanking you for reaching out and taking an interest in this story, because right now that's what it is. There's no car, there's no Donnie. So until there's a car and a Donnie, it's a story. And I appreciate your time in reaching out.
Yvonne? You're welcome. You're welcome. That's what I do. Me and I think it was Emily who I think first contacted you. I think, is that correct?
Yes.
Emily, who assists me on so many of these cases. She does a great job finding people like yourself, and I feel very fortunate to have talked to you as much as we've talked so far, and I've really enjoyed our interview today. We're going to continue to talk. I want to assure you that I'm not going anywhere after this interview plays. And I want to thank you for being on this episode of Unfound.
I want to thank you too, and you're welcome.
You're welcome too, Yvonne.
And that was my interview with Yvonne Irwin Bowen, the sister of Donald Irwin. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. And I also want to extend my thanks to Emily, who made this interview possible. As you heard in the interview, a couple points raised during it were not discovered until Yvonne went back to all of her information after I first talked to her. So I guess you could say those points were rediscovered. An example would be that Karen went out the night before Donald disappeared. Yvonne had forgotten about that. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. In fact, you the listeners may not realize that this happens quite a bit. Many times families forget about information they knew or were given years ago. It's very common. And for me to have discussions with them that cause them to go back and look at that information and once again rediscover something new is very rewarding to me. And it's certainly helpful for them. No matter how you look at this case, you can't get around the idea that Donald's disappearance could have been something that was a month in the planning. The GPS ping, Karen calling the car finance company, the fake brother talking to the neighbor. They are some of the most obvious signs of a premeditated disappearance that I think Unfound has ever covered. But are they possibly too obvious? Would someone or a group really leave these breadcrumbs for the police to follow? Well, that Donald's disappearance isn't solved seems to mean that if somebody did do something to Donald, this person or group continues to get away with it, if in fact somebody did do something to Donald. The problem is that all of these could be harmless facts or not even true. The GPS ping, it could mean nothing. Maybe the finance company pinged the car because of the call Karen made earlier that month. Regarding the call, I'm sure every car finance company wishes a customer would make a call like that to warn them that a payment wasn't coming. And the fake brother, we have to remember the neighbor never said anything to Yvonne when the neighbor saw her right after Donald disappeared. It wasn't until much later that the neighbor mentioned the encounter. So, this piece of evidence isn't exactly ironclad. And I think what also adds doubts to Donald's case is that Donald did have a lot of issues that had gone wrong for him. It's not totally inconceivable that he drove off to harm himself. But I'll leave all of you to come up with your own theories. And maybe together we can cause a reversal of fortune in a positive direction for this case. Now, here's my interview with Stephen Huba from the Tribune Review. We discuss his upcoming article at TribLive.com, The Disappearance of Terry Slogenhop.
I'm so happy to have back on the program the reporter at the Tribune Review in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Stephen Huba. Stephen, welcome back to Unfound.
Thanks, Ed. It's good to be with you again.
We both had a little bit of a crazy week with snow, and there was a death in my family, so I feel very fortunate that we are able to talk again under those circumstances. This week, the Trib is covering the disappearance of Terry Slogenhop, who disappeared in Highland Park in 1991. You had an opportunity to meet face-to-face with her mother. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just talked to Charlotte Slogenhop earlier today. I met her at her place, and we talked about her daughter's disappearance in January of 1991. And she was, Charlotte was very subdued, and she's obviously had many years to process the fact that her daughter has disappeared, but you could tell that this was still a very painful thing for her to talk about, and so just a very sad, mysterious circumstance.
Yeah, did she giving you any indication on how the rest of her family, has handled it? Obviously, with a mother, I think it's going to, and parents, it's going to be the worst. But anybody else in her family, do they still talk about it these days, or is it kind of something that's very private to them?
She has she has 3 other children, and her younger son was fairly close to Terry, and he lives out of state now, and he was affected by this more so than I think the other siblings. because he, in fact, was supposed to have seen Terry that week that she disappeared. They were supposed to have gotten together, and it was he that broke the news to his mom that Terry had disappeared, or that she had gone missing.
Oh my.
The younger brother.
Yeah, that's probably, I mean, it's been, 27 years, but I'm sure to Charlotte and probably him, it seems like yesterday. Something sticks out.
Yeah, she has a file with different information in it, and emails and pictures and some past coverage. But to be honest, this case really did not get a lot of attention, even when it happened. There was a picture of Terry and some information that appeared in the Pittsburgh Crime Stoppers magazine.